Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2021 Asia Liberty Forum. I'm Brad Lipps, the CEO of Atlas Network. I'm delighted to know that we have so many people tuning in from all across the continent to discuss how we can work together for freer societies across Asia and for providing greater opportunity for people of all walks of life. Now, some of you are brand new to Atlas Network, and you may be wondering what we're all about and what to expect from the sessions that are taking place today and tomorrow. So let's see if we can answer your questions with this 3-minute video.
Well, Atlas Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the U.S. We have about 159 partners in the United States right now, and the bulk of our partners are outside, nearly 500 in total. It's a network, that is to say, organizations that share common values of limited government, of free enterprise, personal liberty, of personal responsibility, and work together to advance that agenda by rolling back big government, by reducing barriers to people making their lives better through creating wealth and owning property and engaging in trade.
Historically, wealthy nations around the world have tried to help low-income countries develop. The way we've been doing it traditionally has not really been working. It's pretty controversial, both in terms of its efficacy and in terms of whether it's actually doing more harm than good. There's a movement to do development differently, and that means we need to step back as outsiders and rethink the role that we're playing in helping people in low-income countries achieve their dreams.
I think history will at some point make the difference between those who were just happy alleviating poverty, happy with the status quo, and those who said no. Because we respect everyone, we believe everyone has the right to manifest their fullest potential. We are going to work on the tool for them to get there, which is economic freedom. When it comes to that, I think Atlas Network has been the best.
You know, I think everybody wants two things. They want to make a difference, and they want to contribute to something bigger than themselves. And at Atlas Network, I'm able to do that.
It's inspiring to get to transcend partisan politics. Atlas Network is focusing on, I think, the most important and moral cause in the entire world.
You have the opportunity through Atlas Network to support some really inspiring people who are working in very difficult places and achieving results.
The United States does not have a lock on the idea of freedom and liberty. Human flourishing, freedom, liberty are borderless ideas.
I do think that our network adds real value, and the reason is we're focused on outcomes. And if you look at a return on investment as a philanthropist, I think Atlas Network delivers a very strong return on the investment.
What type of legacy do you want to leave behind? This exactly is the work of Atlas Network.
As you see, we have a global vision and a worldwide network. And this year, Atlas Network is celebrating its 40th anniversary. I feel privileged to have been around for more than half of this history, and I can remember back to 1998 when I arrived, and we only had a handful of partner organizations in Asia. I'm really proud of what is now being accomplished by all of you in the Asian freedom movement. We should point out that it's 2 consecutive years now that an organization from Asia has won our biggest global prize, the Templeton Freedom Award. Many of you will remember that the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies received the 2020 Templeton Freedom Award. And then the last time that we were able to convene in person to hand out an Atlas Award was back in November 2019, when the Templeton Freedom Award went to the Foundation for Economic Freedom in the Philippines. I'm very excited at the prospect of being back in person again later this year for the Atlas Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner in Miami, Florida. In the meantime, we're making the most of the capabilities of online conferencing here with our Asia Liberty Forum, where I'm sure you're going to find inspiration, new ideas, and real practical value in the sessions of this conference. As always, we depend entirely on private donors to create these wonderful forums for learning. So I'd very much like to thank the John Templeton Foundation, the Smith Family Foundation, Templeton Religion Trust, Freda Utley Foundation, Thomas W. Smith Foundation, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation. We're together today, virtually of course, but together all the same, thanks to the generosity of the people of these institutions. And also thanks to the terrific co-host that's worked with us on this meeting, an organization based in Nepal, Bikalpa, an alternative. Let's now welcome some words from my friend, the founder of Bikalpa, Basanta Adhikari.
Thank you so much, Brad. Hello, my dear friends. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you all at the Asia Liberty Forum 2021. I heartily thank you all for being the part of it. Bikalpa feels privileged to co-host this prestigious event in collaboration with Atlas Network. I have been the part of this forum since the beginning and have realized that it is a great platform for the like-minded people who believe on the values of freedom. It is a platform which creates an opportunity for networking, sharing ideas, philosophy, and best practices from all around the world to inspire each other. I am one of those who got inspired by this platform. When Robin Sitola, director of Samriddhi Foundation, asked me to be the part of First Asia Liberty Forum 2012 and 13. Till that date, I was unknown to the value of freedom, and I was the supporter of opposite values. At the age of 35, I got an opportunity to see the bigger picture of liberty movement and get to know people and organizations who inspires me till date. A year later, in 2014, I started Bikalpa, an alternative, to promote the value of freedom in my region. Hopefully, this forum will continue to inspire many people like me who will be ready to hold the torch of freedom and help to make the world a better place to live in. Since more than a year, COVID-19 has posed a threat to humanity. After facing the first lockdown in 2020, life was getting normal again. But the second wave of pandemic took our freedom again, crippled the economy, and caused more casualty in our part of the world. Many of we have lost our family members, friends, and loved ones. May the departed soul rest in peace, and God give us the strength to cope with the situation. Today, we are not in a situation to see each other in person and share our thoughts. This is why we are having this online event. But thanks to the ingenuity of human mind and technology, which has made this possible for us to be together and get inspired. As the growing populism and illiberal mentality are on the rise in most part of the world, an Asian continent is not apart from those challenges. Today, Asia needs more freedom. Most importantly, we need daring people like us to challenge our mighty opponents, who are ready to guard their own freedom and the freedom of others. Surviving the liberty movement should not only be our concern. Rather, we should keep on thinking to thrive it. With our sustained and coordinated effort, we have to counter populism, illiberal mentality, policies and the government action which barricades the individual potential and growth and force to suffer many. Motto of this online forum is to bring the freedom-loving individuals together from all over Asia to discuss the existing challenge in the region and highlight the civil society effort that guide public policy in the direction of freedom and prosperity. Again, I would like to thank you all for joining this great event. Thanks to all our generous donors for making this possible. Let us inspire each other and help to make this world more free and prosperous place to live in. Have a great day ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basanta. This afternoon, we're going to open our forum by addressing the elephant in the room, COVID-19. Since March 2020, our Atlas Network team has pointed out that, yes, we've been experiencing a global health crisis, but just as important, we have a global freedom crisis too. How can we regain what has been lost? How can we restore economic growth and provide paths out of poverty for those who are mired in it? We have a few experts today who will join us to share some thoughts on what the path forward looks like for Asian countries. And to introduce this important session, let me turn the podium over to Atlas Network's Associate Director of Training, Alex Cordell.
Thank you so much, Brad, and hello. Thank you all for joining us today. As Brad mentioned, we're going to be talking about this continued threat to public health, but also what it means for personal liberty and economic freedom in Asia. In the name of curbing the spread of infections, we have seen significant instances of government overreach and power grabs. Fresh calls for greater restrictions and lockdowns have become the new normal, begging the question, what does this mean for the future of liberty? To talk about the trends we've been seeing over the past year and how we might move forward, I would like to welcome a few of my friends to the stage. So joining us all the way from down under in Melbourne, Australia, we have Gideon Rosner, who is the Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs. Prior to joining the IPA, Gideon spent several years practicing as a lawyer at one of Australia's largest commercial law firms, as well as several months as interim general counsel of an ASX 200 company. Gideon has also served as an advisor to ministers in the Abbott and Turnbull governments, advising on areas as diverse as electoral reform and Northern Australia economic development. Next up, we have Christine Alcantara, who is joining us from the Philippines, where she is a fellow of the Foundation for Economic Freedom and managing partner of Abad Alcantara and Associates, a Philippine trade law firm specializing in advocating for competition, integration, and innovation law. Christine provides technical advice and policy development assistance to legislators and agencies on trade, investments, economic and sustainable development, women's economic empowerment, as well as innovation. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Lakshmi Sampath Goyal, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Centre for Civil Society in India. Prior to joining CCS, Lakshmi was the CEO of the India Sanitation Coalition, which is a program aimed at driving multi-stakeholder engagement to accelerate the adoption of sustainable sanitation practices in India through partnerships amongst the private sector, implementation partners, multilateral agencies, and governmental agencies. Lakshmi has always had a keen desire to contribute to civil society and did so for many years through mentoring, charity, and volunteering alongside her full-time work. Over the past few years, she's pursued a second career in the development sector with an active interest in education, gender, environment, sustainable livelihoods, renewables, and allied areas. So welcome, Gideon, Christine, and Lakshmi. It's so great to have you all join us today. Thank you.
Great to be here.
It's great to be here.
Excellent. So to kick things off, I wanted to ask each of you about what your experiences have been like over the past year. So in the Philippines, in Australia, and in India, since the outbreak of COVID-19 and the subsequent shutdowns, what, in your opinion, have been the biggest threats to individual and economic freedom? So I'm going to kick things off with Lakshmi, and then we'll go to Christine, and then Gideon.
Thank you, Alex. So actually, this has been a very, very interesting 2 years, and not in a nice way. And I'd really say that in the context of liberty, be it personal liberty or economic freedom, I'm reminded of David Hume, who said that it's seldom that liberty of any kind is lost all at once. So in these about 1.5 years, it's been a bit of a creep up. I think the first and the most significant palpable thing that we notice here in India has been the resurgence of central planning and a concentration of powers at the union government, weakening of freedom, zone of freedom for the state and at the local level. And that, frankly, has pervaded all aspects of the pandemic in terms of managing the pandemic, in terms of how it's impacted individuals, in terms of the impact on the poorest of poor. It's something which is kind of going to have a shadow, which I'm afraid is going to last beyond the pandemic. The key part of this has actually been the lack of consultation and the use of archaic laws to actually concentrate power at the center, and a very, very blind implementation without any duty of care for its impact on the poorest of poor. And this is, India is a developing country. We do have a lot of very poor people. And it is appalling that 230 million Indians, that's a very large number, 230 million Indians, have actually been pushed into poverty during the course of March to December of last year. And a lot of it was completely avoidable. I guess the other very significant aspect is the impairment of economic freedom. And I would say that we could talk about it as we go further, but just as a headline, I think the massive expansion of power of the administrative setup over individuals has actually resulted in a lot of things being designated as essential, non-essential, etc., with no care for the economic impact of it at this point in time, as well as in the future. So while many businesses were really not allowed to operate, and there was a clampdown on restriction of movement of individuals, as well as for business purposes, as well as for their own personal reasons, the state supported many gatherings, and then kind of, it was just all over the place. Everything spread. And so I guess somewhere we do need to recognize the fact that while it may all have been very well-intentioned, the fact of the matter is at the core of it lies the fact that this was an attempt at actually concentration of powers, central planning really moving in a very disastrous way.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi. So, Christine, I am curious, can you tell us a little bit about what have been the biggest threats in the Philippines?
So for the Philippines, essentially, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic was not a public health response. Rather, it was a public order or security response. So at first glance, you would have expected that you should have limited access, or you should have put in effective contact tracing mechanisms. But instead, the response was to limit mobility in its totality, with no specific or proper classifications on what helps the economy or people operate or business operate. So in fact, one of these examples is the definition of the essential workers, and it excluded vital economic players such as those employed in the supply chain. So indeed, medical personnel were allowed to move, but those in the food business, there was not enough supply for everyone to actually meet all of their essential basic needs. And the community guidelines for health and safety were imposed very harshly. In fact, a lot of people were jailed at the start of the imposition of the community quarantines. Well, firstly, because there's no clear definitions or guidelines on when can you go out, or it's changing all the time. You don't know when you're supposed to go out, or you don't know if you belong to an essential category. And most of the execution by those in the or in security would tend to impose it in a very, very harsh manner, as if a crime was committed, and it's not in the context of public health or security. So it's exacerbated a lot because in the pillars of the justice system, the imposition was harsh, but not everyone in the justice system was actually allowed to go out. So you see a lot of people jailed, but there's no one to defend them. There's no one to actually grant them bail or to actually provide for even clemency in that situation. And first, it's actually shown existing inequalities. A lot of contract workers were laid off or the first to go. Social distancing cannot be possible, of course, for the poorest of the poor, because they don't have the necessary housing or, in fact, space to actually implement this. And there's terrible food insecurity, particularly because the supply chain was effective. And of course, small, medium enterprises, they have no access to capital, and they cannot be resilient enough to actually thrive or even survive the COVID-19 pandemic. And worse, there's a lot of public contact tracing mechanisms, but it's more like an aggregation of data, but at the expense of of the risk of data privacy. We don't know where the information is going, and the fact that it's live all the time causes a lot of concerns. So the existing inequalities have been present in the Philippines. We've seen it, but it's gotten worse in the COVID-19 pandemic. And in summary, it's a public health issue, but was acted on like it was the public security or order issue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. And then, so Gideon, I'm curious, can you take a couple of minutes and just share with us what the experience has been like in Australia? What have been, in your opinion, the biggest threats to individual and economic freedom in the wake of COVID?
Well, I concur with Lakshmi, I have to say. It's not a single threat or a single series of greatest threats. It's this cascading perennial Rubicon that's been crossed. I mean, at the start, the government shut down, back in March last year, the government closed businesses with the stroke of a pen and chucked thousands of people onto a very long unemployment queue. And then that wasn't bad enough. We entered a state of martial law, which were police marching around, muscling up to anybody who was outside their own homes for anything except a valid reason. Then we were asked to carry permits to show that we had a lawful excuse to go to work, those of us who were still lucky enough to have jobs and a reason to go into work. We saw a pregnant woman being handcuffed in her own home over a Facebook post which was alleged to have incited breaking of coronavirus laws by arranging a very peaceful anti-lockdown protest in a park. We've seen babies die in utero because closures between state borders have meant that a mother hasn't been able to get to a hospital across state lines for medical care. We've seen Australian citizens criminalised for trying to ring into their own country in the wake of the Indian outbreak. We've seen the idea of vaccine passports, which look like they'll be, are inching closer to being adopted, to travel between states in a single country. Asking Australians to have permission and basically internal papers disclosing their medical history, travel from one end of their country to the other. We've seen just this week a woman who gave birth in Brisbane in Australia who have not been able to see their newborn infant because of they were supposed to be quarantining it when she went into labour, so they've been separated from their newborn. Each of these shows a radical departure from the limits of state power that we've known to understand them. Basically, certainly throughout Australian history, if not the history of the free world, all because of a respiratory illness. And I really do feel we've entered a new era of history here. We've made it okay for governments to do this for one reason. I am very concerned about the precedent that all these things set and wait in horror to see what they do to us next and for what reason.
Thank you, Gideon. So each of you kind of hit on some similar points. So I want to take a couple of minutes to dig a little bit deeper on kind of three main themes that you've touched on. So first off, Christine and Lakshmi, you both spoke extensively about how the government mandated lockdowns and the declaration of essential versus non-essential jobs have really disproportionately affected the poor in your countries. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that and what have been the real unintended consequences for freedom as a result of these mandates? Let's go ahead and start with Christine.
When you define essential and non-essential jobs, you're actually kind of putting a divide on, or you're putting a strict definition on what is relevant or what you think makes the economy work. And the problem was that the division in the Philippines, or in terms of policy, was not based on any economic study or any scientific basis. So in the end, it was more of the privileged or those who had, let's say, more influence or lobbying power on the government that actually can take advantage of who can be declared as essential. And if you're also a bigger corporation with more employees, you have more of a say on you can be declared essential versus non-essential. The trickle-down effect on this is more the marginalized communities did not have enough access to basic necessities. Water was not, public service was a bit of a standstill also, because while they're allowed to go out, it's mostly those who need to go to work do not have the necessary public transportation. And the government actually mandated all businesses to provide transportation for those in the essential businesses. So necessarily, it's the small businesses, or the lifeblood mostly of those in the communities that are suffering. So the effect of the limitation or the limited mobility is felt more by those who do not have the financial capacity to actually spend on additional requirements by the government, such as transportation or even the protective before or in the equipment. So it's really affecting mostly those who cannot even subsidize their employees. So the gains of the Philippines as an emerging economy overnight after the pandemic went down. Mm-hmm. In fact, lastly, our employment rate went down as bad as it was in World War II. So that's the state of the affairs that we were in.
Thank you, Christine. And so, Lakshmi, what has been the experience in India? Has it been similar to what Christine just described in the Philippines?
Yes, Alex, and I think it's similar and yet perhaps a bit worse. So in India, during the lockdown, only certain commodities and businesses were actually allowed to function. And these were the ones which were deemed as essential by the government. And the categorization of a commodity business as essential is actually through a legislative process. And the act, regrettably, is so ancient. It is around the time my mother was born. So this is the Essential Commodities Act 1955, which actually governs which are essential and which are not. And I think all of us will agree that the entire world has changed. In fact, it changes every decade, and to that extent, to actually hold on to a definition of an Essential Commodities Act as crafted out in 1955, or in fact, for that matter, the Essential Services Maintenance Act, which again is pretty old, in 1981, to use those laws actually as the guardrail for determining what is essential or not in itself is just plain inadequate. The second and the more fundamental point here is that these laws are actually being used by the government to regulate the production, the supply, the prices, the distribution of commodities and services and provision of services. And in itself, it undermines the economic freedom and really hinders the market process. And two of the unintended consequences that you would see, and especially in a populous country like India, the first and foremost has been on the street vendors. The large number of street vendors that we have, over 6 million in number, overnight their only source of livelihood was deemed as illegal. In fact, even after the government determined that food as a category is an essential commodity, no suspense there, there was rampant misuse of administrative power to harass the street vendors and to actually not let them go on with the business of earning their livelihoods. This again corroborates back to the point that 230 million Indians have actually been pushed lower down into poverty. The second important set of people who have been brutally impacted are the migrant laborers who essentially come from the rural villages, and they seek employment in the towns. And just overnight, because the lockdown was actually announced with very little notice. And one of the key things in lockdown was that all forms of transportation were also immediately shut down. You had millions of migrant laborers actually walking hundreds of kilometers on highways trying to reach home because they have no form of subsistence in the towns. So these have been two really very, very tragic consequences of the thoughtless manner in which the essential commodities description and the implementation during the lockdown has been done.
Thank you, Lakshmi and Christine, for giving us a very clear picture of what you've been seeing. And so kind of in following up on that same vein, across the world, we are just generally seeing massive expansions of government power in the wake of COVID. So Gideon and Christine, for the rest of our partners and attendees who are joining us, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what you think the role of organizations in our network can be to combat these trends of government overreach. So Gideon, let's go ahead and have you start.
I think the most important thing is just to be that handbrake or that circuit breaker that says to people, hang on, look, I know this is a scary virus. I know this is a terrible disease. I know that it has significant health consequences. But are we really comfortable with a government that tells us we can't, in my case here in Melbourne, right now, I might add, we're in lockdown right now here in Melbourne, Australia. Are we comfortable with a government that tells us we can't leave our own homes for no more than 2 hours a day? Are we happy with a government that tells us we can't send our children to school and we have to moonlight as school teachers and teach and have them learn over something as impersonal as Zoom? Are we really comfortable, again, turning our back on Australian citizens who are in a humanitarian disaster in a significant outbreak in India and can't return home? Are we comfortable having, in Lakshmi's case, having migrant labourers have to walk home because we won't provide transportation? I think the important thing is to get that ember of freedom alive, that little spark, because we don't put enough of a premium on it in the West as much as we used to. It's interestingly, the people I speak to here in Australia who are the most vehemently against lockdowns are typically, Hong Kongers or mainland, ethnic Chinese people or people from Eastern Europe or people from certain places in South America, people who've lived through dictatorships, people who've lived through regimes that have deprived them of their freedom. They know authoritarianism when they see it. I think our job is to remind people of the precious liberties that they're giving up in the name of safety and remind them what history tells us happens when people acquiesce to governance via emergency degree too readily.
Thank you, Gideon. I really like that, keeping the ember of freedom alive. I think that's kind of very on brand with what we're trying to do with our Liberty Forums this year. So, Christine, I'm curious, did you have anything that you wanted to follow up on with that?
That's pretty good also on bringing the Ember of Liberty alive. It's I think organizations in the network have to keep reminding the government and all of society that this is a public health issue. We should all actually not restrict our freedoms and use these freedoms to bring together investments in an interconnected primary healthcare system, bring forth digital transformation of business and support industries that will give jobs. It's not about locking people down. You only actually limit mobility in terms to protect people. But if you really want to protect people in the long run, it's investments, it's supports, it's having the environment where a good healthcare system is available to everyone. So that's more of the long-term vision that networks in the organizations are can help contribute. Our approach has been so far in blocking us a bit short-sighted. So maybe, liberty is actually at foremost one of the solutions to actually bring about a better or more resilient response to these kinds of crises.
Thank you. So another side of kind of this, in the same vein of government overreach in the wake of COVID that we've spoken a bit about, is I think one of the most insidious threats to economic and individual liberty is really just this threat to privacy. So I'd really be curious to hear from all three of you with the expansion of contact tracing apps and different tools such as those. What do you think this new COVID normal looks like for individual privacy? So let's go ahead and Lakshmi, can you kick us off?
Thanks, Alex. So I think the new normal is what is going to be the spectacularly disastrous normal, because I guess it is stuff that all science fiction movies were made of on the Big Brother watching. So to that extent, hurriedly put together contact tracing apps are actually gathering all kinds of data. And the beauty is that because you have all other acts which have been right now put into play on grounds that it's an emergency, and actually emergency situations give vast powers to the government by the way of which they are actually at this point in time collecting a lot of data which is intrusive. Now, the sad part is that I guess the intention here is really to protect and preserve the citizens. And so to that extent, one could argue that, yes, it's all well-founded. However, the fact of the matter is that because it is being invoked under emergency, and for example, in the case of India, it's under the Disaster Management Act, it actually completely indemnifies the government from needing to look after that data. It's like those taxes which get levied and never get rolled back. This is one of those extension of liberty, which actually the individual liberty, which has now been transferred to the government, which is never ever going to get rolled back. I think the second very important part on the aspect of privacy is that what is this being used for? Now, typically, you would use it to contain the pandemic, to do the contact tracing, and then demise the data after that work is over. At this point in time, at least in our, in practical implementation of the pandemic management, I see no utilization of this data for the purpose of containment of the pandemic, or actually for a very smart use of the data in, limiting lockdown or any of that. And therefore, one wonders, what is the use of this data and why would you collect it, knowing full well that you're not going to look after it with the duty of care that you should?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that this is a very important point, and we're doing a similar panel at some of our other sessions, and this threat to privacy is something that a lot of our partners are concerned about. So, Gideon, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this new COVID normal for privacy?
Well, I guess the first observation I'd make is this is a logical extension of socialised medicine. It's something that's basically an article of faith in Australia, and while most of us, can agree that, the disadvantaged and the underprivileged should, of course, have access to top quality medical care, and we should subsidise it. There's this idea in Australia and in many other places in the Western world that healthcare is a God-given right. Now, the problem with that is that basically your most intimate decisions about your health, whether to risk it, whether to protect it, how you live your life, how it affects it, the government basically has a stake in that. So it's a roundabout way of saying that we've basically reached the logical extension of that, insofar as the government can watch the minutiae of your behaviour to make sure that you're being safe, and that the bodily health in which it has a stake can be managed. So we're already seeing shocking intrusions to our privacy as a result of this pandemic. We're seeing people who've had their bank accounts, or stories of various authorities accessing people's bank accounts to make sure purchases haven't been made at the incorrect locations. We've seen police drones be deployed to spy on people in their backyards. In fact, I know somebody who had their sister over to babysit, and the police drone followed this woman home after she'd left. We've seen not only was Melbourne, Australia, the only instance last year of it being illegal for the Jewish community to have a service on Yom Kippur last year, but helicopters circled over Jewish neighbourhoods on Yom Kippur in a clear case basically of religious persecution. Again, I mean, it's hard to single out privacy as one right among many that we've lost as a result of the coronavirus, but with the souped up surveillance state, that's what we've ended up with. And like the observations often made, a lot of people expected that China would become more like the West. In the end, the West has become more like China, and this public health idea has been weaponised to create a quasi-social credit system.
And Christine, what would be your thoughts?
It made, at least for data privacy concerns, the pandemic made it like possible, or made some states an excuse to use contact tracing apps as a live surveillance system. And when it shouldn't be like that, usually the tools to actually use contact tracing apps are some means of containment. But sometimes the tracing goes on live, or it can actually give you real live data, meaning they could transmit what you're doing right now, where you are, what did you buy, your current medical health information. But it should not be the case. We should be wary on the applications that actually monitor everything that we do on a actually real-time basis. Because what we can do actually to balance this out, it should be encrypted, the data should be encrypted, and can be only made live to the relevant authorities when you test positive or there's actually a health issue. So moving forward, a better cybersecurity network is also expected to be established by governments to actually protect the system, the citizens, but also everyone, even civil society, has to be transparent if they're collecting data. It's data only used for containment. And we also have to look into what the apps that we download are, if they're actually monitoring our activity on a real-time basis. So that's something that we should be careful of in this new normal.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely something that I think organizations in our network have been strong, ringing the bells against these breaches of privacy, but I think we'll have to be continually vigilant moving forward. So kind of moving on, Lakshmi and Gideon, you have both spoken a bit during this session about the role of free enterprise and civil society stepping in, where there have been some pretty significant failures of the government. So I'm curious, can you tell maybe a story of an instance where civil society or free enterprise has been able to step in, or maybe if there was a missed opportunity that they could have stepped in and avoided some of these catastrophes? So let's go ahead and Gideon, can you kick us off?
Look, it's a hard one. I've been sort of racking my brain to think of one. Look, there have been private charities that have done good work and looking after furloughed workers and so on. But really and truly, you'd think that in this extraordinary time of need, of human deprivation, this completely self-inflicted humanitarian crisis that Australia has put itself through, there would be, we're a wealthy country. We have quite a big charitable sector. You'd think that, A, they would be doing a lot more than they did, but secondly, they would be beating down the door of our parliaments, of our politicians' offices and saying, stop this madness and stop this barbarity. I haven't really seen that in a serious and concerted way. People are either too afraid to speak up against what's going on, or they've been implicitly supportive of it because it's a bit like climate change or a whole swag of other issues. It's sort of the fashionable moral cause, and to speak out against it or to deviate from popular opinion makes you a pariah. So I think that it points at a cultural issue insofar as the civic institutions we rely on have been taken over by the same ideology that thinks this is okay. And our battle isn't just for political freedoms or for economic freedoms, but our organisations really need to have one eye to the culture and to bring about cultural change and a change to public debate that will mean that society will rally around our values, not values that have been imposed on them by a cosmopolitan, insular, comfortable and hypocritical elite.
And Lakshmi, would you concur? Are there any instances that you've seen in India?
Actually, Alex, I think in India we have a very different situation. I must say that this is a silver lining. And one does see a lot of the rise of the human spirit, I would say, and faith in the civil society. So it was all over the news that there was a huge shortage and mishandling of the entire oxygen supply situation at the governmental level. And that is when, in fact, lots of civil society organizations, as well as the businesses in India, actually took up the responsibility of supplying oxygen when there was a huge shortage and people were dying. And a good example is, for example, the Tata Group actually imported 24 cryogenic tankers. The Reliance Group, one of the largest groups in India, began manufacturing oxygen in one of their plants. Many NGOs completely diverted their focus and attention to on-ground work and to supply food, for example, to the migrant laborers, to make sure that the masks were available where the government administration was unable to reach, and so on and so forth. In fact, I think it is only on the strength of the civil society organizations, and just the spirit of the businesses have demonstrated in this pandemic that the country has managed to stay afloat. So I'm afraid I don't concur, and we do have, I think, a very, very heartwarming situation here in India. with the civil society making up for the lacuna in the government.
No, that's fantastic to hear. And in a year after, so many disappointments, it's very nice to see that civil society is able to step up and, fill the gap where needed. So we have about 4 minutes left. So I just wanted to pose one last question to each of you. So looking ahead, even after the end of this pandemic, the next COVID will inevitably come. So I'm curious, how do you all think that we as individuals or as organizations in our network can balance good public health policy with strong protections for individual liberty to, kind of borrow from Gideon again, keep that ember of freedom alive? So Christine, what are your thoughts?
Essentially, you have to actually understand that any response to a crisis must be inclusive. So any policy or any civil society contributions must also look out for those first, the poor. Those cannot be those who are weathering it harder than the most. And a response should always be decentralized, and you have to actually give the power to local communities and civil society just to make sure that you respect their individual liberty. Because if you respect these individual liberties, everyone will come together and actually help resolve either this current health crisis or even future crisis that may happen.
Thank you, Christine. And Lakshmi, we'll turn to you next.
Thanks, Alex. So I think one thing is very, very clear that decentralization is definitely important, and so as civil society organizations, I really think that we'll have to keep pushing for it in various forms, and alongside make sure that there are robust institutions which are created at the local levels, so that there is actually a capacity to take that autonomy which is going to be accorded to the states and the local level, because without that, it's actually not going to work at all. So I do believe that a combination of the two will be very important. The second, small aspect is, and it's actually a very large small aspect, which is the role of press, in our lives. And I do feel that there is a lot more that can be done by the way of just constructive contribution to a crisis, as against simply reporting dead people, or dying children, etc. Because just doing that, 15, 16 months down on a crisis is just plain insensitive without really a point of view on convening an action committee which is going to support the creation of a solution. So I really feel that the power that rests in press has to be really adequately, correctly used. These two. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gideon, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I think we need to capture the narrative. I think when the dust settles on all these things, we need to make sure that, because the Joe Bidens and the Boris Johnsons and the Gretchen Whitmers and all those people, they will try to spin the narrative that, state action and state coercion saved lives and saved us all from this virus. It did not. And the more that our organisations tell the real story and show that not only do lockdowns and all sorts of other things not really make a difference when it comes to containing and healing this virus, but they cause a whole lot of problems for our livelihoods and liberties as well. The more we can highlight that this awful saga and the state did more harm than good, the more we can hopefully avoid this ever from happening again.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this morning. As our wonderful panelists have highlighted, there have certainly been some sobering realities that we have had to endure over the last year, but I'm very happy looking forward and just hearing about the wonderful things that our partners are doing and that free enterprise and civil society are doing to maintain those strong protections for individual liberty. So thank you to our panelists, Gideon, Christine, and Lakshmi, for joining us this morning, as well as everyone for tuning in. So I am going to turn things back over to Brad to close us out.
Well, thanks so much, Alex, for leading a great conversation with our panelists. As you said, it was pretty sobering to discuss what may be becoming the new normal. I like that all the groups in our network have this power to not make that new normal inevitable. We all can be helpful in changing the narrative to show that resilience cannot be ordered from the top down, and where we saw it with this horrible last year of COVID-19 has been really springing from civil society and from free enterprise. I hope those are the lessons that our partners can continue to emphasize as we look forward to future challenges. So thank you for the great session, and thank you all for attending. If you made it here, you probably are navigating our online platform just fine, but I want to call attention to a couple of features that you might have missed. If you haven't seen it already, please do check out the instructional video in the event lobby so you know all the capabilities of the event platform you're experiencing. You can find a link to the video in the center of that event lobby page. It was great also to hear from Basanta. Very thankful for his team for their help in making this event a success. And let me also encourage you to click in the top left corner to learn more about our co-host, Vikalpa and Alternative, a really fantastic organization from Nepal. All of our Asia Liberty Forum sessions will be available on demand. So if you do need to step away, don't sweat it. You can watch at your own convenience. And finally, if you need help at all throughout this two-day conference, just click the help button in the bottom left corner. A member of our team will be able to assist you there. We're going to be heading right now to our next session, Overcoming Challenges to Advance Economic Freedom. I hope you're looking forward to a great Asia Liberty Forum. We'll see you soon.